It started with a sound I couldn't place at first, a sharp, rhythmic snip 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 cutting through the early morning quiet like a metronome set to chaos. I was halfway through my second cup of coffee, still in my flannel pajama bottoms, scrolling through emails on my porch when I heard it. The noise was faint but insistent, accompanied by a low, self-satisfied HOA tune I vaguely recognized as Sweet Caroline, though it was being butchered with off-key enthusiasm. I set my mug down, my programmer's brain already debugging the situation. That's not a bird, not a lawnmower, and definitely not my neighbor's usual Saturday routine. Curiosity turned to dread as I followed the sound to the back of my property. I'd only been in the house for months. A cozy two-story craftsman I'd bought for its promise of solitude in a suburban pocket, just outside the grip of the Crestwood Homeowners Association HOA. The property was my sanctuary, nestled at the edge of the neighborhood with a 6-foot-tall bamboo privacy screen I'd painstakingly planted myself. That bamboo was my pride and joyless, green, and thick enough to block out the world, including the prying eyes of Crestwood's self-appointed guardians. I'd spent weeks researching fast-growing varieties, digging trenches, and installing root barriers to keep it contained. It was my personal fortress, a natural wall between me and the manicured conformity of the HOA-controlled lots next door. As I rounded the corner of my yard, still barefoot and clutching my phone, I froze. There, balanced precariously on a folding step stool, was a woman in a neon green tracksuit, her hair pulled into a tight ponytail that bobbed with every aggressive snip of her garden shears. She was carving a rectangular gap through my bamboo, each cut as precise as if she were sculpting a topiary for the queen. Leaves and stalks littered the ground like casualties of a one-woman war. She didn't notice me at first, too absorbed in her vandalism, humming louder as she tossed a handful of my precious bamboo over her shoulder like confetti. "What in the actual hell are you doing?" I shouted, my voice cracking with a mix of shock and rage. She didn't flinch. Instead, she turned her head slowly, like a villain in a low-budget thriller, and flashed a smile so smug it could have curdled milk. "Oh, good morning, darling," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Just improving the neighborhood flow." "You're welcome." I blinked, my brain struggling to process the audacity. "You're cutting a hole in my bamboo. On my property. Who are you?" She stepped down from the stool, wiping her hands on her tracksuit as if she'd just finished a casual gardening chore. "I'm Vanessa, Crestwood HOA's Community Enhancement Chair. This," she gestured at the gaping wound in my bamboo, "is for pedestrian efficiency. The shortcut to the community pavilion is a nightmare otherwise. I'm saving everyone at least a minute per trip." I stared at the hole, a perfect 2-foot by 3-foot rectangle, and then back at her. "This is private property. You can't just—" "Sweetie," she interrupted, holding up a hand like she was silencing a toddler. "It's for the greater good. You'll see." And with that, she folded her stool, tucked her shears under her arm, and sauntered off toward the HOA-controlled side of the street, leaving me standing in my pajamas, barefoot in the dew-soaked grass, staring at the wreckage of my privacy. My name's Ethan, and I'm a data analyst who works from home, which means I value quiet, order, and boundaries more than most. I'd chosen this house precisely because it sat just outside the HOA's jurisdiction, their glorious feet beyond their reach. According to the county surveyor's map, I'd escaped their rules about lawn height, mailbox colors, and whether my garbage cans could offend the aesthetic harmony of the block. My bamboo screen was my declaration of independence, a living wall that said, "I'm here for the vibe, not the oversight." And now Vanessa, with her shears and her self-righteous smirk, had declared war on it. That afternoon, I drove to the local nursery and bought replacement bamboo stalks, spending hours replanting and weaving them into the gap. I also installed a motion-activated security camera pointed directly at the damage, its lens glinting like a silent promise of accountability. My gut told me Vanessa wasn't done, and I wasn't about to let her turn my yard into a public thoroughfare. By nightfall, I'd fortified the hole as best I could, but the unease lingered like a bad aftertaste. Sure enough, at 3:12 a.m., my phone pinged with a motion alert. I opened the camera app and nearly dropped my glass of water. There was Vanessa, illuminated by the camera's night vision. dressed in a black hoodie and sweatpants, wielding her shears like a ninja on a mission. She was meticulously undoing my repairs, snipping away the new stalks with surgical precision. At one point, she paused, looked directly at the camera, and gave a little wave, mouthing, "Cute effort." Then she dragged a small ladder from the shadows and propped it against my bamboo for better reach, humming Sweet Caroline again as she worked. I called the police the next morning, my hands shaking as I described the footage. The officer who showed up was sympathetic but unhelpful. "It's trespassing, sure," he said, scratching his neck as he watched the video on my phone, "but without significant property damage like, say, her torching the whole thing. It's tough to get the DA to care. This is more petty suburban nonsense." "Petty?" I gestured at the hole, now even wider than before. "She's turning my yard into a public walkway." He shrugged. "Try talking to the HOA, or put up a sign. If she keeps it up, we can maybe push for a restraining order, but you'd need more evidence of harm." Frustrated but undeterred, I printed a private property, no trespassing sign and nailed it to a post beside the bamboo. I also emailed the HOA, attaching screenshots from the footage, a copy of my property survey, and a politely worded demand that they rein in their community enhancement chair. The response came within hours, a single sentence: "We are reviewing your concerns and will address them accordingly." It was the kind of non-answer that screamed, "We're hoping you'll give up." Spoiler, I wasn't giving up. Over the next week, Vanessa's antics escalated in ways that would have been comical if they weren't so infuriating. She didn't just return to the bamboo, she weaponized her position in the HOA to make my life a bureaucratic nightmare. On Tuesday, I found a citation taped to my mailbox, claiming my bamboo was overgrown and hazardous to pedestrian safety. On Thursday, she showed up with a measuring tape and a notebook, standing just inside my property line, scribbling notes and muttering about non-compliant vegetation. When I confronted her, she claimed she had verbal authorization from the HOA president to assess my yard for community impact. I demanded proof. She smirked, said, "Check your tone, Ethan," and walked away. By Friday, I had enough. I contacted the city's zoning office and confirmed what I already knew. My property was outside the HOA's control, and their citations were as legally binding as a fortune cookie. The zoning officer, a cheerful woman named Carla, laughed when I described Vanessa's antics. "Sounds like you've got a real HOA warrior there," she said. "You're in the clear, though. Your land, your rules." Emboldened, I decided to fortify my defenses. I ordered a roll of heavy-duty wire mesh to reinforce the bamboo and planted a row of thorny rose bushes along the property line for good measure. I also upgraded my security system, adding 2 more cameras and a motion-activated floodlight. If Vanessa wanted to play Edward Scissorhands, she'd have to do it under a spotlight. That weekend, a courier dropped off a thick envelope from the HOA. Inside was a formal notice accusing me of disrupting neighborhood cohesion with my aggressive landscaping choices. It included grainy photos of my bamboo from inside my property line, which meant someone had trespassed again. The letter threatened fines for visual obstruction and demanded I remove the wire mesh. Within 48 hours, I laughed, scanned the notice, and sent it back with a highlighted copy of my property survey and a note: "Kindly direct all future correspondence to my attorney. Trespassing is a crime." The next morning, I woke to find my mailbox covered in bright blue spray paint, the word "obstacle" scrawled across it in jagged letters. The security footage showed a figure in a hoodie, Vanessa, unmistakably sneaking up at 1 a.m. with a spray can. I filed another police report, but the officer's response was the same: petty vandalism, hard to prosecute without a witness or direct confrontation. I could feel the frustration boiling, but I wasn't about to let Vanessa's petty terrorism win. That's when I had my epiphany. Patching the bamboo wasn't enough. Signs weren't enough. Even cameras weren't enough. Vanessa wasn't just attacking my property, she was attacking my peace, my right to exist unbothered in my own space. I needed something permanent, something she couldn't snip, climb, or spray paint away. I needed a statement so bold it would redefine the boundaries of this war. I spent the next day sketching ideas on my tablet, researching materials, and browsing local contractors. My vision wasn't just a fix-it, it was a monument. I pictured a stone wall, 8 feet tall, with intricate masonry and a sleek, modern finish. It would be beautiful, impenetrable, and undeniably legal. I called a local masonry company, Stonehaven Designs, and spoke to the owner, a gruff man named Diego who sounded like he'd built walls to fend off invasions in another life. When I explained my situation, HOA overreach, a rogue neighbor with shears, and a need for something Vanessa-proof, he chuckled. I've dealt with her type before. Let's make it epic. Diego came by the next day with a portfolio of designs, each more impressive than the last. We settled on a plan, a stone wall with a textured limestone finish, capped with decorative iron finials for a touch of elegance. It would run the entire length of my property line, with a gated entrance for access. I submitted the plans to the city, which approved them in record time apparently. They were as tired of HOA nonsense as I was. The wall would be a fortress, a work of art, and a middle finger to Vanessa's entitlement, all wrapped in one. As the first truckload of limestone blocks arrived, I felt a shift in the air. The delivery crew unloaded the materials, and the clatter of stone against stone echoed through the neighborhood like a battle cry. Neighbors peeked out from their windows, some curious, some approving. One guy, a retiree named Frank who lived across the street, brought me a beer and said, "About time someone stood up to that woman." I clinked my bottle against his and grinned. This wasn't just about me anymore, it was about every neighbor who'd ever been bullied by a clipboard and a power trip. Vanessa, predictably, lost it. The moment she saw the construction crew setting up, she stormed across the street, her ponytail swinging like a pendulum. "This is an outrage," she shrieked, waving her phone like she was about to call in an airstrike. "You're turning this neighborhood into a prison." I leaned against my porch railing, sipping my coffee, and handed her a folder with the city permits and survey. "It's a decorative stone wall, Vanessa. Fully permitted, fully legal, and fully on my property. Unlike your shears." Her face turned a shade of red I didn't know was possible. She flipped through the documents, her hands trembling, then threw them on the ground. "You're making a mockery of our community standards." "Community standards don't apply to my land," I said calmly. "Maybe you should read the survey next time before you start cutting." She stormed off, muttering about emergency meetings and aesthetic violations. I didn't care. The wall was going up, and with every stone laid, I felt the balance of power tipping in my favor. Over the next few days, the construction became a neighborhood spectacle. Cars slowed to a crawl as drivers gawked at the rising wall. Kids rode their bikes by, whispering about the castle going up in Ethan's yard. A few neighbors stopped to chat, their curiosity outweighing their fear of Vanessa's wrath. One woman, a quiet librarian named Sarah, confided that Vanessa had once fined her $200 for planting tulips that were too red for the HOA's color palette. "You're doing what we've all wanted to," she said, her eyes sparkling with something like hope. Vanessa, meanwhile, was in full meltdown mode. She paced the sidewalk across from my property, taking photos of every stone, every worker, every blade of grass that dared to grow near the construction site. She called the HOA president daily, demanding they intervene. She even tried yelling at Diego's crew during their lunch break, claiming the wall was a public safety hazard. Diego, unfazed, just turned up his radio and kept laying bricks. On the third day, I came home to find a neon orange notice taped to my front door. It was from the HOA, accusing me of violating community aesthetic guidelines and demanding I halt construction. Immediately, the letter was signed by Vanessa and included a blurry photo of my half-built wall. Captioned "Visual Disruption." I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my takeout. My property wasn't under their jurisdiction, and they knew it. I sent back a response with the same zoning map, permits, and a polite note: "This is private property. Your guidelines don't apply. Please stop trespassing." That night, I heard Vanessa's voice through my backyard camera's microphone, loud and unhinged. She was on her phone, pacing her own yard, which backed up to mine. "This wall is a disgrace," she hissed. "If he thinks he can hide behind it, I'll tear it down myself." I saved the footage, backed it up to the cloud, and sent a copy to my lawyer friend, Mia, who replied with a single. She offered to draft a cease and desist letter, but I wasn't ready to go legal yet. I wanted to see how far Vanessa would push this. Her next move was both predictable and absurd. On the 5th day of construction, while I was on a Zoom call with a client, I heard a commotion outside. I muted my mic and ran to the window. There was Vanessa, halfway up a ladder she'd propped against my partially built wall, trying to climb over it with a pair of bolt cutters in one hand. She was shouting about emergency access and community rights when her foot slipped, and she wobbled dangerously. The bolt cutters clattered to the ground, landing in my rose bushes. Diego's crew, eating lunch nearby, burst out laughing. I grabbed my phone, hit record, and stepped outside. "Vanessa, you're trespassing. Again. Get off my property." She froze, one leg still dangling, her face a mix of fury and embarrassment. "This wall is illegal," she spat. "I'm inspecting it for code violations. It's permitted, and you're not a city inspector," I said, holding up my phone. "Smile for the camera." She scrambled down, nearly knocking the ladder over, and stormed off, leaving the bolt cutters behind. I called the police again, this time with video evidence of her climbing my wall with a tool clearly meant to cause damage. The officer who arrived was different from the last one. A no-nonsense woman named Officer Patel who watched the footage with a raised eyebrow. "This is escalating," she said. "I'll file a report for attempted vandalism and trespassing. If she keeps this up, we can push for a restraining order." That evening, I posted a still from the video to the neighborhood's private Facebook group. Captioned, "Anyone missing a pair of bolt cutters? Found them in my yard." The post blew up. Neighbors commented with laughing emojis, stories of their own Vanessa run-ins, and a few choice nicknames for her, including the Sheer Terror. By morning, the post had over 300 likes, and someone had uploaded a meme of Vanessa's ladder incident with the caption, "When your HOA dreams hit a stone wall." The neighborhood was starting to turn, and Vanessa's grip was slipping. But she wasn't done. On Saturday, she organized an emergency HOA meeting in her front yard, complete with folding chairs, a megaphone, and a banner that read "Save Our Community." I watched from my upstairs window, sipping coffee and eating toast, as she ranted to a small crowd of 6 or 7 loyalists. She called my wall a monument to selfishness and accused me of undermining property values. With my fortress mentality, she even hinted that I was hiding something illegal behind the wall, which got a few murmurs but no real traction. Most of the attendees looked bored or uncomfortable, and left before she finished her speech. By the time the wall was completely a stunning 8-foot limestone barrier with iron finials, and a wrought iron gatite was more than a boundary. It was a symbol. Neighbors stopped by to take selfies with it. A local blogger wrote a post titled "The Wall That Won Crestwood," calling it a masterpiece of passive-aggressive architecture. Diego, the mason, shook my hand when the last stone was laid. "This," he said, grinning, "is Vanessa proof." I thought that might be the end of it. The wall was up, the permits were ironclad, and the neighborhood was rallying behind me. But Vanessa wasn't the type to slink away quietly. She was planning something bigger, something desperate, and I was about to find out just how far she'd go to reclaim her imagined throne. The morning after my stone wall was completed, I woke to a sense of calm I hadn't felt in weeks. The limestone gleamed in the dawn light, its iron finials catching the sun like tiny crowns. My backyard, once a battleground for Vanessa's shears, was now a fortress of solitude, sealed off from her entitled crusades. I sipped my coffee on the porch, scrolling through the neighborhood Facebook group where my wall had become a minor celebrity. Comments ranged from iconic to "Can you share the contractor's number?" One neighbor, a retiree named Gloria, posted a photo of her dog posing in front of the gate with the caption, "Even Fido respects the boundary." I chuckled, thinking maybe, just maybe, Vanessa had finally gotten the message. I was wrong. At 7:45 a.m., my phone pinged with a motion alert from the front gate's camera. I opened the app, expecting a delivery driver or a curious kid, but there was Vanessa, dressed in a crisp white blazer and holding a clipboard like it was a scepter. She wasn't alone. 2 other HOA board members, both looking like they'd rather be anywhere else, stood behind her, along with a man in a polo shirt carrying a professional-grade camera. Vanessa was pointing at my wall, gesturing wildly. while the photographer snapped pictures from every angle. She stepped onto my property line, her heels sinking into the grass, and taped a neon green notice to the gate. The camera caught her muttering, "This eyesore won't last a week." I jogged outside, still in my sweatshirt, and ripped the notice off. It was a masterpiece of bureaucratic nonsense, accusing my wall of obstructing community access and violating pedestrian safety standards. It demanded I appear at an HOA compliance hearing in 3 days or face escalating penalties. The signature at the bottom was Vanessa's, scrawled in aggressive red ink, with the title Community Enhancement Chair underlined twice. I glanced up to see her staring at me from across the street, her arms crossed, her smile as sharp as her shears. "Vanessa," I called, waving the paper, "my property isn't under your jurisdiction. You know this." She didn't flinch. "The HOA has a responsibility to maintain neighborhood integrity, Ethan. Your wall is a threat to that. See you at the hearing." She turned on her heel, her entourage trailing behind like reluctant ducklings. I wasn't worried about the hearing. Me permits were airtight, and the city had already confirmed my property's independence from the HOA's grip. But Vanessa's persistence was starting to feel like a personal vendetta, not just a power trip. She wasn't fighting for community efficiency anymore. She was fighting to save face, and that made her unpredictable. I called Diego, the mason who'd built the wall, and asked if he'd ever dealt with an HOA pushing this hard. "Oh, yeah," he said, his voice crackling with amusement over the phone. "They'll try anything: fake citations, sob stories, even petitions. You've got to outlast them. Keep your paperwork tight and your cameras rolling." That night, I reviewed the footage again, catching something I'd missed. The man with the camera wasn't just taking photos for the HOA. He'd zoomed in on the gate's lock, the wall's foundation, even the rose bushes I'd planted. It felt less like documentation and more like reconnaissance. I backed up the footage and emailed it to Mia, my lawyer friend, with a note: "Vanessa's up to something. Any ideas?" She replied within minutes: "She's building a case, probably for a city complaint or a public smear. Stay sharp." The next morning, I noticed something odd. A small group of neighbors, none of whom I'd spoken to, were walking past my wall, glancing at it nervously before hurrying away. By noon, a post appeared in the neighborhood Facebook group, shared from an anonymous account called Crestwood Unity. It featured a grainy photo of my wall with a caption: "Is this fortress tearing our community apart? Share your concerns." The comments were a mix of confusion and outrage, with a few people defending the wall, but others parroting Vanessa's talking points about safety hazards and neighborhood division. One comment, from an account I suspected was Vanessa's alt, claimed I was hiding suspicious activity behind the wall. I rolled my eyes but felt a prickle of unease. She was trying to turn the neighborhood against me. I decided to fight fire with truth. I posted a response in the group, keeping it calm but firm. "My wall is on private property, fully permitted by the city, and built to protect my privacy after repeated trespassing. Here's the zoning map and permits for anyone curious." I attached the documents and a screenshot of Vanessa climbing my wall with bolt cutters. The post gained traction fast, racking up likes and supportive comments. One neighbor, a mechanic named Jamal, wrote, "Vanessa's been bullying people for years. Ethan's just the first to push back." Another, Sarah the librarian, added, "Maybe we should talk about who's really disrupting the community." By evening, the Crestwood Unity account had deleted its post, but Vanessa wasn't deterred. The next day, I found a new notice taped to my mailbox, this one claiming my wall was interfering with emergency access routes and threatening a city inspection. I called Carla at the zoning office, who laughed when I read her the notice. "Emergency access? Your wall's on your own land, and it's not blocking any public right-of-way. Sounds like someone's desperate." She promised to flag any complaints from the HOA as frivolous, but suggested I attend the compliance hearing to see what Vanessa was planning. The hearing was held in the Crestwood Community Pavilion, a glass-walled building that looked like it was designed for yoga retreats, not HOA showdowns. I arrived early, armed with a folder of permits, zoning maps, and printed screenshots of Vanessa's trespassing. About 25 neighbors showed up, some curious, some clearly in Vanessa's camp. She sat at a folding table at the front, flanked by the HOA president, a nervous-looking man named Gerald, and the treasurer, a woman who kept checking her phone like she was waiting for an escape hatch. Vanessa opened the meeting with a speech that could have been scripted for a daytime drama. "This wall," she said, pointing to a projected photo of my limestone masterpiece, "is a symbol of division, a deliberate attack on our community's unity. Ethan has chosen to isolate himself, to reject our values, and to endanger our safety with this monstrosity." She paused for effect, expecting gasps. The room was silent except for a kid in the back crunching on chips. I raised my hand. Gerald, looking relieved to shift focus, called on me. I stood, holding my folder like a shield. "My wall is on private property, outside HOA jurisdiction, as confirmed by the city. Here's the zoning map." I passed out copies. "Here are the permits." And here, I held up my phone, showing the bolt cutter video, is evidence of Vanessa trespassing and attempting to damage my property. If anyone's disrupting the community, it's her. The room erupted in murmurs. Vanessa's face twitched, but she recovered quickly. "That's irrelevant," she snapped. "Your wall is a safety hazard, and we filed a complaint with the city to have it removed." Gerald cleared his throat. Vanessa, we haven't actually." She shot him a look that could have melted steel. "We will file it, Gerald. This is about principle." I sat down, letting her words hang in the air. The neighbors weren't buying it. One woman, a nurse named Linda, stood up and said, "I walk past Ethan's wall every day. It's not blocking anything. What's blocking my peace is getting HOA fines for my kids' chalk drawings." A few others nodded, and Vanessa's composure started to crack. The meeting ended with no vote on my wall. Gerald admitted they had no legal grounds to enforce anything. As people filed out, several stopped to shake my hand or whisper their support. Vanessa stayed at the table, scribbling furiously on her clipboard, her ponytail quivering with rage. I knew this wasn't over. She wasn't the type to admit defeat. 2 days later, I woke to another motion alert. The footage showed Vanessa at 2 a.m., sneaking up to my gate with a flashlight and a stack of papers. She taped a thick envelope to the gate, glanced at the camera, and scurried away. The envelope contained a petition, signed by concerned residents, demanding the city investigate my wall for obstructing traditional pedestrian pathways. The signatures looked suspiciously similar, and 3 names belonged to people I knew had moved away. I smelled a rat, a Vanessa-shaped one. I called Mia, who laughed when I described the petition. "Forged signatures? That's a bold move. Send me the footage and the petition. We can file a complaint for fraud." I did, but I also wanted to know why Vanessa was so obsessed with my yard. The pavilion was accessible via a perfectly good sidewalk. Her shortcut argument didn't hold water. I decided to do some digging. That evening, I took a walk past the pavilion, pretending to be out for a casual stroll. Through the windows, I saw Vanessa setting up for what looked like a private event. String lights, a folding table with wine bottles, and a sign that read Crestwood Wellness Collective. A dozen people were inside, rolling out yoga mats and sipping drinks. Vanessa stood at the front, leading a stretching session, her voice carrying through an open window. "This is our sanctuary, ladies. Let's keep it exclusive." I pulled out my phone and searched Crestwood Wellness Collective on Instagram. Sure enough, there was a private account with dozens of posts about elite wellness experiences hosted by Vanessa. Photos showed candlelit yoga sessions, wine tastings, and mindfulness workshops, all held in the pavilion. Comments mentioned a $15 drop-in fee and praised the secret vibe. One post even tagged my property line with a caption, "Soon, we'll have a more direct path to serenity." It hit me like a ton of bricks. Vanessa wasn't just obsessed with control, she was running a side hustle on HOA property, and my yard was the shortcut for her paying clients to sneak in without drawing attention. I called Carla at the zoning office and asked about commercial use of community spaces. "If she's charging for events without a permit, that's a violation," Carla said. "And if she's using your private property as an access route, that's a whole other problem. Send me what you've got." I compiled everything: screenshots of the Instagram page, footage of Vanessa taping the petition, and a list of the questionable signatures. I submitted it all to the city's code enforcement portal, flagging the pavilion events as unpermitted commercial activity. Then I waited. 3 days later, I got my answer. I was working from home when I heard shouting from the pavilion. I grabbed my binocular size. I'd bought a pair for situations like this and saw two city inspectors at the pavilion's entrance, clipboards in hand. Vanessa was arguing with them, her arms flailing, but they weren't budging. Within minutes, the lights were off, the wine bottles were packed away, and a small group of yoga-goers shuffled out, looking confused. One inspector taped a notice to the door as Vanessa stood by, her face a mask of barely contained fury. The next morning, an HOA newsletter went out, announcing the pavilion's temporary closure for regulatory review. It didn't mention Vanessa by name, but the neighborhood grapevine was buzzing. Jamal, the mechanic, texted me, heard Vanessa got slapped with a fine for her yoga scam. You behind this? I replied with a winking emoji and left it at that. But Vanessa wasn't done. That night, my cameras caught her spray painting my gate again, this time with the word Tyrant in neon yellow. I filed another vandalism report, and Officer Patel promised to escalate it. She's digging her own grave, she said. Keep the footage coming. Vanessa's next move was her most desperate yet. She posted a video to the neighborhood Facebook group, standing in front of my wall, tearfully claiming I was destroying Crestwood's spirit with my hostile architecture. She held up the petition, calling it proof of community outrage, and begged neighbors to stand against division. The video was theatrical, complete with dramatic pauses and a shaky voice, but it backfired spectacularly. Neighbors flooded the comments with screenshots of my permits, clips of Vanessa's trespassing, and stories of her past overreach. One woman posted, "Vanessa fined me $50 for my kid's lemonade stand. Ethan's wall is the least of our problems." The video went viral not in Vanessa's favor. Someone edited it with cartoon sound effects, turning her speech into a meme that spread across local social media. By the next morning, Crestwood's wall guy was trending on X, with users praising my stand against HOA tyranny. A local news outlet picked up the story, interviewing me about the wall and Vanessa's antics. I kept it factual. I built the wall to protect my privacy after repeated trespassing. The city approved it. That's the story. Vanessa's reputation was crumbling, but she had one last card to play. A week later, I received a letter from the county, claiming my wall violated emergency egress protocols and needed a review. The letter was signed by a low-level clerk, but the attached petition bore Vanessa's handwriting. I checked the signature shelf for duplicates or fake, including one from a neighbor who'd been dead for 2 years. I sent the letter and footage of Vanessa taping the petition to Mia, who filed a formal complaint for petition fraud. The city responded swiftly. Vanessa was summoned to a hearing for falsifying documents, a serious offense that could carry fines and a misdemeanor charge. The HOA, desperate to distance itself, issued a statement suspending Vanessa from all board activities and apologizing for recent misunderstandings. Neighbors started openly defying her, ignoring her emails and laughing off her citations. The tide had turned, and my wall stood as a quiet monument to her defeat. But I wasn't done. I wanted to cement this victory, not just for me but for every neighbor who'd lived under Vanessa's thumb. I hired a landscaper to add climbing jasmine to the wall, weaving it through the iron finials, and installed solar-powered lanterns along the path. I called it my Serenity Wall, a nod to Vanessa's failed yoga empire. Then I planned a neighborhood barbecue not in the pavilion, but in my own backyard, behind the wall. I sent out digital invites, requiring our SVPs to keep it exclusive. Within hours, nearly every neighbor signed up. The barbecue was a hit. Kids played cornhole, adults swapped stories about Vanessa's reign of terror, and a local band played acoustic covers under the jasmine-laced wall. Across the street, Vanessa's blinds twitched, but she didn't come out. For the first time, she was silent. The barbecue behind my Serenity Wall marked a turning point. The neighborhood, once stifled by Vanessa's reign as the HOA's self-appointed enforcer, was buzzing with a new energy. Neighbors laughed freely, shared stories without looking over their shoulders, and toasted to the wall that had become a symbol of defiance. My backyard, framed by the jasmine-laced limestone and glowing with solar lanterns, felt like a liberated zone. Kids chased each other through the grass, adults swapped recipes, and Jamal, the mechanic, Proposed a toast to Ethan, who built a wall and broke a tyrant. The cheers were loud enough to echo across Crestwood, and I caught a glimpse of Vanessa's blinds twitching in her darkened house across the street. She was watching, but for once, she stayed silent. I should have known silence from Vanessa wasn't surrender, it was strategy. She was plotting her final stand, and it would be her most audacious move yet. 2 days after the barbecue, I woke to an email from the HOA, titled Urgent, Community Safety Violation. It claimed my wall was creating unacceptable traffic hazards by forcing pedestrians to use the main sidewalk, which, according to the letter, was overcrowded and unsafe. It demanded I install a public access gate within 7 days or face a $500 daily fine. The signature was Gerald's, the HOA president, but the language screamed Vanessa, threatening and completely detached from reality. I called Carla at the city's zoning office, who sighed when I read her the letter. "They're grasping at straws," she said. "Your wall doesn't block any public right-of-way. I'll flag this as another nuisance complaint, but watch your back. They're not giving up." I thanked her and checked my security footage, half expecting to see Vanessa sneaking around again. Sure enough, at 4:17 a.m., there she was, taping the letter to my gate with a flashlight in one hand and her clipboard in the other. She paused to glare at the camera, her face a mix of defiance and exhaustion, as if she knew she was fighting a losing battle but couldn't stop herself. I wasn't worried about the letter me permits and zoning map were bulletproof, but Vanessa's persistence was starting to feel like a siege. She wasn't just attacking my wall anymore. She was attacking the idea of anyone standing up to her. I decided to preempt her next move. I printed out the email, highlighted the parts that falsely claimed jurisdiction over my property, and sent it to Mia, my lawyer friend, with a note. "Can we turn this into a harassment case?" She replied, "Oh, we're way past harassment. This is bordering on abuse of power. Let's draft a cease and desist." While Mia worked on the legal angle, I kept digging into Vanessa's obsession with my yard. Her wellness collective had been shut down by the city for zoning violations, but I suspected she was still scheming to revive it. I checked the Instagram page again and noticed new posts, now geotagged at a private residence at Vanessa's own house. The captions promised exclusive pop-up wellness events with discreet access for members. One photo showed a group doing yoga in her backyard, with a familiar sight in the background, my wall. The caption read, "Our serenity is just a step away. Stay tuned for new pathways." It was clear she was still trying to use my property as a shortcut, likely to avoid scrutiny from neighbors who'd caught on to her unauthorized business. I shared the screenshots with Carla, who confirmed that hosting paid events in a residential backyard without a permit was another violation. "She's digging herself deeper," Carla said. "Keep documenting. If she steps on your land again, we can push for trespassing charges." I upgraded my security system again, adding a high-decibel alarm to the gate that would blare if anyone tampered with it. I also posted a new sign, "Private property violators will be prosecuted." Cameras in use. The next morning, I woke to the sound of the alarm screeching. My phone showed Vanessa at the gate, trying to pick the lock with a hairpin, her face illuminated by the floodlight. She froze when the alarm went off, dropped the hairpin, and bolted back to her house. The footage was crystal clear, and I sent it straight to Officer Patel, who'd been handling my vandalism reports. "This is gold," she said. "I'll add it to the file. She's making it easy for us." But Vanessa's real gambit came a few days later. A courier dropped off a thick packet from the county, claiming my wall violated historical aesthetic guidelines for Crestwood, which was apparently part of a heritage corridor. The packet included a petition with 50 signatures, demanding the city review my wall for cultural disruption. I flipped through the pages and immediately spotted the same issue as before. Half the signatures were in identical handwriting, and several names belonged to people who didn't live in Crestwood. One was even my old college roommate, who lived in Seattle. Vanessa had gone full forgery. I called Mia, who laughed so hard she had to put me on hold. "This is fraud, Ethan. Straight up, prosecutable fraud. Send me the petition and the footage of her taping it. We'll bury her." I did, and Mia filed a formal complaint with the city attorney's office, citing petition fraud and harassment. She also drafted a cease and desist letter addressed to Vanessa and the HOA, demanding they stop all actions against my property or face legal action. While Mia handled the legal front, I decided to go public. I posted the petition's forged signatures to the neighborhood Facebook group, along with a timeline of Vanessa's trespassing, vandalism, and fake citations. I kept it factual but sharp. This is what happens when you stand up for your rights in Crestwood. Vanessa's been forging documents and breaking laws to push her agenda. Here's the proof. I attached the footage, the petition, and my permits. The post exploded, with neighbors sharing their own stories of Vanessa's overreach. One woman wrote about a $300 fine for her unauthorized birdhouse. Another described Vanessa measuring her lawn with a ruler to enforce grass height rules. The group was a flood of pent-up frustration, and my wall had become the rallying point. By evening, the local news caught wind of the story. A reporter from Channel 7 showed up, asking to interview me about Crestwood's wall guy. I agreed. Keeping it simple, I built the wall to protect my privacy after Vanessa trespassed and damaged my property. The city approved it, and the HOA has no jurisdiction. This is about respecting boundaries. The segment aired that night, complete with clips of Vanessa's ladder incident and the forged petition. The reporter called it a suburban saga of power, pettiness, and one very sturdy wall. Social media lit up, with Crestwood Wall trending on X and memes of Vanessa's antics spreading like wildfire. Vanessa's empire was crumbling, but she had one last desperate play. The following Saturday, she organized a community unity rally in the pavilion, which had reopened after the city's inspection. She sent out a mass email, claiming the rally was to reclaim Crestwood's spirit from divisive elements. The flyer featured a photo of my wall, captioned "A barrier to our future." I decided to attend, not as a participant, but as an observer, bringing my folder of evidence just in case. The rally was a flop. Only a dozen people showed up, most of them Vanessa's loyalists, clutching signs that read unity over walls and Crestwood stands together. Vanessa took the Stagia folding table with a megaphone and launched into a speech about preserving our heritage and stopping rogue neighbors. She pointed at my wall, visible through the pavilion's windows, and called it a monument to selfishness. Her voice cracked as she accused me of undermining property values and harboring suspicious activity. The crowd was silent, except for one guy who coughed awkwardly. I stood at the back, waiting for my moment. When Vanessa opened the floor for comments, I stepped forward. "I'd like to address a few inaccuracies," I said, holding up my folder. "My wall is on private property, outside HOA jurisdiction, as confirmed by the city. Vanessa's been trespassing, vandalizing, and forging petitions to harass me. Here's the evidence." I passed out copies of the forged petition, screenshots of her Instagram hustle, and stills from the security footage. The room went quiet, then erupted in whispers. Gerald, the HOA president, looked like he wanted to disappear. "This wasn't on the agenda," he stammered. Vanessa tried to interrupt, but a neighbor, Linda, the nurse, stood up. "Enough, Vanessa. You've been bullying us for years. Effen's wall isn't the problem, you are." The room broke into applause, and Vanessa's face turned the color of her neon tracksuit. Security escorted her out after she refused to stop shouting. The rally dissolved, and neighbors stayed behind to talk not about Vanessa's unity, but about how to reform the HOA. Jamal suggested a vote to replace the board. Sarah proposed transparency rules for fines and citations. For the first time, Crestwood felt like a community, not a dictatorship. The city's response to the forged petition came a week later. Vanessa was summoned to a municipal hearing, where she faced charges of petition fraud and obstruction of zoning protocols. The judge didn't buy her tearful claims of misunderstanding the process. She was fined $1,000, given a misdemeanor citation, and placed under a 6-month community conduct probation. The HOA, desperate to avoid further scandal, stripped her of all board privileges and banned her from community facilities. A newsletter went out, signed by the new interim president, apologizing for recent leadership failures and promising reform. I decided to celebrate. I hosted another backyard event, this time called Wallfest, with food trucks, live music, and a bounce house for the kids. The jasmine on the wall was in full bloom, and the lanterns cast a warm glow over the party. Neighbors brought desserts, shared stories, and took selfies with the wall. One kid drew a chalk mural of it, complete with cartoon Vanessa running away. The mood was electric. People weren't just celebrating the wall, they were celebrating freedom. Vanessa stayed out of sight. Her blinds stayed closed, her car stayed parked, and her voice, once a constant in Crestwood, went quiet. I heard she'd tried to start a new wellness group in a neighboring town, but it fizzled when word of her Crestwood antics spread. She'd become a cautionary tale, a reminder that entitlement doesn't survive when met with resolve. In the months that followed, Crestwood transformed. The new HOA board passed rules requiring open meetings, clear fine policies, and resident input on decisions. They turned a vacant lot into a community garden, where neighbors planted vegetables and flowers without fear of aesthetic violations. Kids rode bikes without citations, and mailboxes stayed unpainted. The pavilion hosted free events, movie nights, book clubs, even a pottery workshop into everyone. Not just Vanessa's paying clique. I added a final touch to the wall, a carved wooden plaque over the gate that reads "Serenity starts here." It wasn't just about my yard, it was about the peace we'd all reclaimed. Neighbors stopped by to chat, often bringing coffee or cookies, and shared their own dreams for the neighborhood. Frank, the retiree, started a weekly poker night. Linda organized a kids' soccer league. Sarah led a campaign to install new streetlights. Crestwood wasn't just a place to live anymore. It was a place to belong. One afternoon, a young couple moving in down the street knocked on my door. They'd seen the news stories and wanted to meet the wall guy. "We were nervous about moving here," the woman said, "but your story made us feel safe, like we can have our own space." I smiled and handed them Diego's card. "Build your boundaries early," I said, "and get good cameras." The wall, once a flashpoint, became a landmark. A local magazine featured it in a spread about unique suburban architecture, calling it a testament to personal freedom. Diego sent me a framed copy of the article, with a note, "Vanessa proof and proud." I hung it in my office, next to a photo of Walfest, where neighbors were laughing under the jasmine. As for Vanessa, she faded into the background, a ghost of her former self. I saw her once, months later, walking her dog at dusk. She avoided eye contact, her ponytail limp, her clipboard nowhere in sight. The neighborhood had moved on, and so had I. The wall stood, not as a barrier, but as a promise: respect my space, and I'll respect yours. Vanessa had tried to cut through my bamboo, but all she'd done was plant the seeds for her own downfall and for Crestwood's rebirth.